The air hung heavy with the silence of forgotten memories. Dust lay thick on the surfaces, a blanket of neglect over once cherished furniture. The windows were grimy, obscuring the outside world like cataracts in the eyes of an old man. In the flickering gaslight of the street lamps outside, one could almost make out the faded grandeur of the place. The plush booths, the ornate counter, the gleaming espresso machine, now cold and lifeless. The cafe was a tomb of memories, a forgotten monument to a brighter past. Jason, a young man with a thirst for adventure, stepped cautiously through the doorway. His flashlight cut through the darkness, a beacon in the sea of shadows that clung to the cafe's interior.
I see beauty in the decay, a certain melancholic charm in the forgotten and abandoned.
Jason, a photographer by trade, ran a hand along the dusty surface of a nearby table, his fingers tracing the outline of a heart carved into the wood. He imagined the young lovers who had sat here, their laughter echoing through the cafe. As he reached the counter, he noticed a small, faded photograph tucked behind the register's dusty glass. The woman in the photo was beautiful, with high cheekbones and a cascade of dark, curly hair.
Who are you?
He couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching him, her gaze following his every move. As Jason stared at the photograph, he felt a cold draft snake around his ankles, raising goosebumps on his skin. The bell rang again, this time closer, and Jason felt a chill run down his spine. Jason's heart pounded in his chest. The bell's chime echoed through the emptiness, a haunting melody that seemed to seep into his bones.
Where are you coming from?
He shone his flashlight into the dark corners, its beam cutting through the gloom like a surgeon's scalpel. Fear, cold and clammy, tightened its grip on Jason's chest, squeezing the air from his lungs. He felt a cold spot on his arm, as if an icy finger had traced a path across his skin. Jason's gaze swept the room, searching for the source of the sudden chill. That's when he saw it. On a small table in the center of the room, a single cup of coffee steamed invitingly.
What is this?
He cautiously approached the table, his flashlight beam illuminating the cup. The coffee inside was a deep, rich brown, steam curling from its surface in wispy tendrils that disappeared into the darkness above. Jason whirled around, his heart pounding in his chest.
Who's there?
And then he saw her. A figure shrouded in shadows stood in the corner of the room, her form barely discernible against the darkness.
Oh my God.
Fear, sharp and cold, shot through Jason.
Don't be afraid.
The woman's voice was a soft, melodic murmur that seemed to drift from the shadows themselves.
Who are you?
The woman took another step forward, her form emerging from the darkness like a phantom taking shape. Her dress, once a vibrant blue, was now faded and dusty.
I am the waitress. I have been waiting for you.
Waiting for me? But why?
The last customer? Every night I wait for the last customer. It is my duty, my curse.
What happens when the last customer comes?
Jason's mind reeled. A waitress? In a cafe that had been abandoned for years? It made no sense. The woman's gaze drifted to the cup of coffee on the table, its steam now fading into the cool air. He already feared the answer, his gut twisting with a premonition of something terrible.
They become like me, trapped here forever.
Jason's breath hitched in his throat. He understood. He was meant to be the next victim of this place, the last customer in a string of souls claimed by the abandoned cafe. He looked from the woman's anguished face to the steaming cup of coffee on the table, his mind racing. He had to escape. He had to get out of this cafe and never look back. An idea sparked in Jason's mind, a desperate gamble that might just be his only chance of escape. The woman's eyes widened, her gaze fixed on Jason's hand as it closed around the warm ceramic of the cup. Could this be it? Could this young man be the one to break the cycle, to free her from her ghostly prison? Jason lifted the cup, the aroma of the coffee filling his senses, a potent blend of bitter and sweet.
What is your name?
He needed to buy time, to figure out a way to use this unexpected turn of events to his advantage.
They called me Sarah.
Jason raised the cup to his lips, his gaze never leaving Sarah's. He took a slow, deliberate sip, the hot liquid scalding his tongue, the bitter taste flooding his mouth. He fought the urge to cough, to spit out the coffee and break the strange spell that had settled over the cafe.
He watched as Sarah's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. Hope and fear warred on her face, a reflection of the conflicting emotions churning within Jason himself. He knew that he was playing a dangerous game, but he had to see it through.
This coffee, it reminds me of someone.
He paused, gathering his thoughts, weaving a tale of loss and regret, mirroring the sorrow he sensed in Sarah's spectral heart.
My grandmother. She used to make coffee just like this, every Sunday afternoon after church.
He closed his eyes, conjuring up the image of his grandmother's warm kitchen, the scent of cinnamon and freshly baked bread mingling with the aroma of coffee. He told Sarah about the old chipped mugs, the ones his grandmother refused to throw away, the ones that held a lifetime of memories in their worn ceramic. Sarah stood transfixed, her spectral form shimmering in the dim light of the abandoned cafe. Jason's words painted vivid pictures in the air, stirring long dormant emotions within her. For a moment, the weight of her eternal servitude seemed to lessen, replaced by a flicker of warmth, a yearning for a past life, a life filled with the simple joys of human connection.
Sunday dinners, laughter and arguments, the bittersweet pain of watching my grandmother age, her once vibrant spirit slowly fading. She passed away, and an emptiness settled over my life in her absence. The coffee became a ritual, a way to honor her memory, to keep her spirit alive in my heart.
And as he spoke, he realized that he wasn't just telling Sarah a story. He was sharing a piece of himself, a piece of his own grief and longing. A single tear rolled down Sarah's cheek, a shimmering droplet that hung suspended in the air, a testament to her lingering humanity. Jason watched as the tear fell, landing on the dusty floor with a soft, almost imperceptible thud. It was a sound that spoke volumes, a sound that shattered the silence of the abandoned cafe and broke the spell that had held them both captive.
Jason gently placed the coffee cup back on the table, his gaze never leaving Sarah's. He could sense a shift in the atmosphere, a lightening of the heavy energy that had permeated the cafe.
Thank you for remembering. The air, once thick with despair, now held a glimmer of something else. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just a shared sense of sorrow. The silence that followed was no longer oppressive, but filled with an unspoken understanding, a bridge of empathy built across the chasm between the living and the spectral. Sarah reached out a trembling hand, her spectral fingers hovering just above Jason's. He could feel a faint warmth, a tingling sensation where her touch should have been. Her eyes, once filled with a haunting sadness, now held a flicker of gratitude, a glimmer of peace.
The words seemed to echo through the cafe, a release of pent-up emotions that had been trapped for far too long. The air shimmered around Sarah, her form becoming less distinct, the edges blurring as if she were fading away. Jason watched in awe as a warm, ethereal light began to emanate from Sarah, bathing his hand in a golden glow. It was a light that seemed to banish the shadows, to chase away the chill that had seeped into his bones. It was a light that spoke of forgiveness, of redemption, of the enduring power of human connection. The light intensified, enveloping Sarah completely. She closed her eyes, her face bathed in a serene light, the lines of sorrow softening, the weight of eternity lifting from her shoulders.
I felt a lump forming in my throat, a mixture of sadness and relief washing over me. I knew with a certainty that defied logic that Sarah was finally free.
He watched as the light began to swirl and dance, forming a vortex of energy that filled the abandoned cafe. The air crackled with electric anticipation, the temperature fluctuating wildly as the boundaries between the physical and the spectral blurred. Jason felt himself being drawn towards the light, a magnetic pull that he couldn't resist.
I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the unknown. Was this it? Was this the price of Sarah's freedom, my own soul forfeit to the spectral realm? I had faced my own mortality with a sense of calm, accepting my fate. But as the light engulfed me, I felt not fear, but a strange sense of peace.
The light faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Jason standing alone in the center of the abandoned cafe. He blinked, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. The air was still, the silence almost deafening after the whirlwind of energy that had just swept through the room.
I looked around, searching for any sign of Sarah, for any trace of the light that had consumed her. The cafe was empty. The chairs sat overturned, the tables dusty and bare. The air was heavy with the scent of dust and decay. The familiar aroma of coffee vanished. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what had just transpired. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination brought on by the late hour and the eerie atmosphere of the abandoned cafe?
He ran a hand through his hair, his fingers brushing against something small and hard. He brought his hand down, opening his palm to reveal a single, faded blue button, identical to the ones he had seen on Sarah's dress. It was a tangible reminder of the spectral encounter, proof that he hadn't imagined it all. The first rays of dawn pierced through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, casting long, sharp shadows across the dusty floor of the cafe. Jason stirred, his body stiff and sore from a night spent huddled in the cold, empty space.
I slowly sat up, my head pounding, my memories of the night before returning in a rush of fragmented images. The shadowy figure, the steaming cup of coffee, the blinding light. I looked around the cafe, my eyes scanning the familiar surroundings, the overturned chairs, the dusty tables, the abandoned counter. It looked different in the harsh light of day, less menacing, more melancholy. The air, once thick with spectral energy, now felt stale and lifeless, the silence heavy with the weight of forgotten dreams.
He slowly uncurled his fingers, revealing the blue button nestled in his palm. It was cold to the touch, the fabric worn thin with time, but it was real. He traced the outline of the button with his thumb, the smooth, cool surface grounding him in the reality of the moment.
I wasn't sure what had happened that night, but I knew with a certainty that defied logic, that I had been touched by something extraordinary, something both terrifying and beautiful. I stood up, my legs shaky beneath me, and made my way towards the boarded-up entrance. I had to get out of this place, to breathe in the fresh air, to feel the warmth of the sun on my face. I needed to ground myself in the reality of the living, to shake off the lingering chill of the spectral encounter.
Jason stepped out of the cafe and into the bright morning light, the sounds and smells of the city washing over him like a wave. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the fresh, clean air, the taste of freedom bittersweet on his tongue.
I looked back at the abandoned cafe, its boarded-up windows staring back at me like vacant eyes. I thought of Sarah, of her eternal servitude, of her longing for release. I hoped with all my heart that she had found peace, that my act of kindness, however small, had been enough to break the chains that bound her.
He slipped the blue button into his pocket, a tangible reminder of the spectral encounter, a promise to never forget the woman who had haunted the abandoned cafe. As he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving a part of himself behind, a piece of his soul forever intertwined with the fate of the last customer.
I knew that I would never forget my night in the abandoned cafe, that the experience would stay with me, a haunting reminder of the thin veil that separates the world of the living from the realm of the dead. And though I knew that some might dismiss my story as a hallucination, a figment of my imagination, I held fast to the truth I held in my heart. I had looked into the eyes of a ghost, had shared a moment of profound connection with a soul lost in the shadows. And in that moment I had glimpsed a truth that transcended the boundaries of life and death, a truth about the enduring power of compassion, the lingering echoes of love, and the haunting beauty of stories left untold.
Imagine a town draped in darkness. Ravensbrook, they called it. Not just any darkness, but the kind that sinks its teeth into your bones. the kind that makes every shadow seem alive. The air itself was a weapon that night, sharp and frigid. It bit at exposed skin, a constant reminder of the cold that seeped into everything. The residents of Ravensbrook knew this cold. It was the kind of cold that drove folks indoors, sealing them away behind thick walls and shuttered windows. It was a night for huddling around hearths, flames casting flickering shadows that danced with the fears of those gathered close. But fear, like the cold, has a way of seeping in through the smallest cracks. Ravensbrook held secrets, whispered stories passed down through generations, tales told with wide eyes and hushed voices. They spoke of a night, much like this one, when the darkness deepened, a night when the cold held a different kind of bite. The elders would speak of a presence, something unnatural that haunted the darkest hours. They warned of shadows that moved with a purpose and of sounds that chilled the very marrow. Most dismissed these tales as folklore, the ramblings of old minds seeking solace in superstition. But some, those who remembered the stories a little too vividly, felt a shiver of unease as the church bell tolled, marking the stroke of midnight. Midnight in Ravensbrook, the witching hour, a time when the veil between worlds thinned and the impossible threatened to bleed into reality. The silence of the night, already heavy, deepened. It pressed in on the town, a suffocating blanket of anticipation. Unseen by those huddled inside their homes, a wind picked up, swirling through the empty streets. It carried with it a faint, rhythmic sound, a sound easily dismissed had anyone been foolish enough to be out in the elements. But this was no ordinary wind, and the sound it carried was no mere trick of the ear. It was the sound of approaching dread, the sound of Ravensbrook's dark secret riding hard on the back of the midnight wind. The rhythmic clatter grew louder. It echoed off the frost-covered buildings, a haunting drumbeat in the silence. It was a sound that spoke of power, of untamed energy, slicing through the stillness of the night. Each hoofbeat was a hammer blow to the heart, a stark reminder that something was coming. From the furthest edge of Ravensbrook, where the houses gave way to the endless expanse of the moor, it emerged. A shape in the darkness, at first indistinct, like a figment of the swirling snow. But it solidified quickly, taking on a terrifying form. A horse, its coat as black as night, muscles rippling beneath its skin as it thundered down the cobblestone street. Section 2. The Black Rider emerges. The horse was a creature of nightmares. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, two crimson embers that pierced the darkness. Its breath rose from its nostrils in great ghostly plumes, vanishing as quickly as they formed in the frigid air. But it was the rider that truly stole the breath from your lungs. He sat tall in the saddle, a figure cloaked in shadows. A wide-brimmed hat, black as pitch, concealed his features, leaving only the unsettling glow of his eyes visible beneath. His attire was that of a bygone era, a long, flowing coat that billowed out behind him like a funeral shroud. He rode with an eerie stillness, a stark contrast to the raw power of the beast beneath him. Section 3. Fear in the Frost. The few flickering lights that dared to challenge the darkness of Ravensbrook were not enough to penetrate the gloom that clung to the rider. His presence seemed to swallow the light, leaving only a void where he passed. Behind shuttered windows, hearts pounded in unison with the horse's hooves. Fear, sharp and cold as ice, gripped the town. Whispers died in throats, replaced by gasps of terror. Children burrowed deeper under blankets, their small bodies trembling. Parents, their faces pale and drawn, could only hold their loved ones close, praying that whatever evil rode the night would pass them by. a specter of midnight. The horse and rider made no sound save for the relentless drumming of hooves against stone. They were a phantom spectacle, a chilling tableau that unfolded before terrified onlookers. At the crossroads, the horse stopped abruptly. Then, with a snort, the horse wheeled around, vanishing into the shadows. The echo of hooves faded into the distance, leaving an unnerving silence in its wake. Inside their homes, the townsfolk of Ravensbrook held their breath. Each creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind against their windows, sent shivers down their spines. Fear, potent and contagious, spread through the town like a plague. Whispers, hushed and urgent, escaped from behind barred doors. "What was that? Did you see it?" Questions hung in the air, unanswered, unanswerable. The elders, their faces etched with a lifetime of weathered wisdom, muttered about ancient tales, stories of restless spirits and vengeful beings, long forgotten, now resurrected in the heart of the night. The weight of unspoken dread settled over Ravensbrook. It clung to the rafters of their homes, seeped into the very mortar that held the bricks together. The once familiar streets, now shrouded in darkness and unsettling silence, seemed to pulsate with a life of their own. Sleep that night was a distant dream for the residents of Ravensbrook. They lay awake in their beds, listening, waiting, dreading the sound of hooves against cobblestone. Every gust of wind that rattled their shutters sounded like the spectral steed returning, hungry for more than just their fear. The children, their imaginations fueled by the terror that permeated the air, whispered to each other under the covers. The stories they shared, a bizarre mix of folklore and their own heightened fears, painted a vivid picture of the night rider. He was a specter, they said, a harbinger of death, come to collect the souls of the wicked. His eyes, they swore, burned with the fires of hell itself, capable of seeing into the darkest corners of their hearts. Their parents, desperate to shield them from the horrors of the night, tried to soothe their fears with reassurances, but even their voices trembled, betraying their own deep-seated unease. The night wore on, each hour an eternity. The clock on the town square, usually a comforting reminder of the passage of time, now seemed to tick away with malicious intent, counting down the minutes until the next unwelcome visitation. The specter of the midnight rider lingered in the shadows, a chilling reminder that some things once seen could never be unseen. The townsfolk of Ravensbrook, once a community bound by shared hopes and dreams, were now united by a primal fear, a shared terror that clung to them like the icy breath of the grave. The black horse, a creature of pure darkness, moved with an unsettling grace. It wasn't just the speed, though it moved like a phantom wind through the narrow lanes of Ravensbrook. It was the silence, the way it seemed to devour sound itself. The clatter of hooves, so thunderous before, was now muffled, as if the night itself conspired to hide its passage. Every so often, the horse would rear back on its hind legs, its silhouette stark against the backdrop of the moon. The rider, shrouded in his dark cloak, would remain utterly still, a statue atop a living nightmare. Then, with a toss of its head and a snort that echoed like a death rattle, the horse would continue its ghostly gallop. Those unfortunate souls who dared to peek from behind their curtains felt a chill deeper than the biting frost. It was the eyes of the horse that truly instilled fear, two burning embers that seemed to bore into their very souls. They glowed with an unnatural light, a malevolent intelligence that belied the beast's earthly form. It was as if the horse were searching for something or someone, Its gaze swept over the windows of Ravensbrook, lingering for a moment on each one as if daring those inside to challenge its presence. And then, with a snort of disdain, it would move on, leaving a trail of icy dread in its wake. The town of Ravensbrook, once a place of warmth and laughter, was now a prisoner of its own fear. The streets, usually bustling with life even at this late hour, were deserted. Doors remained bolted shut, windows covered, as if the town itself were holding its breath, waiting for the nightmare to pass. But the horse and its rider seemed in no hurry. They moved with a deliberate slowness now, their presence a suffocating weight upon the town. It was a game of cat and mouse, the hunter relishing the terror of its prey. Each echoing hoofbeat was a tick of the clock, counting down the minutes until dawn, if dawn would even come. On and on the horse and rider rode, their movements taking on an almost hypnotic quality. The townsfolk, trapped in their homes, could only watch in horrified fascination as the spectacle unfolded beneath the pale light of the moon. It was a dance of despair, a macabre waltz between the living and the unknown. The horse, a creature of darkness and power, held the town captive with its very presence, and the rider, shrouded in shadow, remained an enigma, his motives as impenetrable as the night itself. Time in its relentless march seemed to both crawl and fly. The church bell, its tone usually a source of comfort, now echoed with the weight of doom. Each clang of the bell hammer was a nail hammered into the coffin of hope. And as the final resonation of the bell faded, the clock tower struck a new hour, the bewitching hour of 1. The air, already thick with fear, crackled with a new energy. It was palpable, a tangible shift in the atmosphere, as if the very fabric of reality were thinning, revealing the abyss beneath. The horse, sensing the change, stopped its restless pacing. It stood motionless in the center of the town square, its sides heaving, its breath forming clouds of frost in the freezing air. Then it happened. A sound so primal, so full of raw power, that it seemed to emanate from the depths of the earth itself. The horse threw back its head, its black mane whipping in the wind, and let loose a roar that shattered the silence of the night. It was a roar born of fire and brimstone, a sound that spoke of ancient power. Windows rattled in their frames, the very stones of Ravensbrook seemed to tremble. Children screamed, burying their faces in their mothers' skirts, while men felt a primal fear grip their hearts. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the roar ceased. Silence descended once more upon Ravensbrook, a silence heavier, more profound than before. The horse, its eyes still glowing with that malevolent light, lowered its head, its breath steaming in the frigid air. The rider, shrouded in shadow, remained an enigma, his reaction to the ear-splitting roar hidden from view. Then, with a speed that defied logic, they were gone. One moment they stood there, a terrifying tableau illuminated by the pale moonlight. The next, they had vanished. There was no fading into the shadows, no gradual disappearance. It was as if they had been erased from existence, leaving behind only the lingering echo of the roar and the stench of sulfur in the air. The silence stretched on, broken only by the pounding hearts of the terrified townsfolk. Minutes passed, then hours, but the silence remained, a heavy blanket of dread smothering the town. The wind, which had whipped through the streets earlier, carrying the sound of approaching doom, now lay dormant, as if even the elements themselves were afraid to disturb the unsettling peace. Dawn, when it finally came, brought little comfort. The sky remained a bruised purple, the sun a pale ghost struggling to penetrate the gloom. The streets of Ravensbrook remained deserted, the doors bolted shut, as if the town itself were holding its breath, afraid of what might happen if it dared to exhale. Dawn broke over Ravensbrook, but the town remained cloaked in fear. The rising sun seemed powerless to penetrate the darkness. Streets were eerily deserted. Doors remained bolted shut, windows covered. Whispers replaced the sounds of trade and laughter. The townsfolk of Ravensbrook, once a community bound by the routines of daily life, now found themselves united by a shared sense of dread. They gathered in small groups, their voices hushed, their faces etched with fear and confusion. What had they witnessed? Was it a demon from the depths of hell, a restless spirit seeking vengeance, or some other worldly entity beyond human comprehension? The elders, their faces etched with a lifetime of weathered wisdom, could offer no answers. They searched their memories, sifting through ancient tales and half-forgotten legends, but found no solace in their lore. The Midnight Rider, with his fiery steed and chilling silence, defied explanation, a terrifying enigma that mocked their attempts to understand. As the days turned into nights, the fear in Ravensbrook refused to abate. The memory of the Midnight Rider, of his deafening roar and sudden disappearance, lingered in the air like a phantom limb, a constant reminder of their vulnerability. Sleep, once a sanctuary from the cares of the day, became a torturous ordeal, haunted by nightmares of hooves drumming against cobblestones and eyes burning with malevolent intent. The once familiar streets, now cloaked in an almost tangible sense of dread, were avoided after dark. The laughter of children, once a constant melody in the town, was silenced, replaced by a chilling silence that spoke volumes of their unspoken fears. The Midnight Rider, though gone, had left an indelible mark on Ravensbrook, a haunting legacy of fear and uncertainty. The terror that gripped Ravensbrook was more than just the fear of the unknown. It was the fear of the unseen, the fear that lurked in the shadows of their minds, whispering doubts and fueling suspicions. Neighbors, once bound by trust and camaraderie, now eyed each other with suspicion, their hearts poisoned by the fear that the rider might return, or worse, that he had never truly left. The bonds of community, already strained by the shared trauma, began to fray. Accusations were whispered, fingers pointed, and old grudges resurfaced with renewed vigor. The Midnight Rider had not only shattered the peace of Ravensbrook, but had sown the seeds of discord, leaving the townsfolk to grapple not only with their fear, but with the erosion of their own humanity. Life in Ravensbrook stumbled onward. The blacksmith's hammer rang out, a tentative counterpoint to the lingering silence. The baker's oven filled the streets with the comforting aroma of fresh bread. Children returned to their games, their imaginations haunted by the Midnight Rider. The memory of that night lingered in the heart of the town. Tales of the Black Horse and its rider were whispered, each retelling adding dread to the legend. Life in Ravensbrook continued, but it was forever altered. The townsfolk now listened intently to the whispers of the wind, searching for any sign of their nocturnal visitor. Shadows held a sinister quality, their movements scrutinized for any hint of the rider's passing. On windy nights, the townsfolk lay awake, hearts pounding with the imagined rhythm of hooves. The Midnight Rider, though gone, had left an indelible mark on Ravensbrook. He had awakened an ancient fear, exposing the fragility of their existence. The experience changed them, leaving them forever marked. The children grew up haunted by the specter of the Midnight Rider. The adults carried the fear, their laughter tinged with a nervous edge. The legend lived on, a haunting reminder that darkness never truly disappears.
Thanks for watching this video, and I see you in the next Terror Story video. Like, subscribe, and enable notification to receive the new video when I post.